A few years ago in a project, I had to create lots of test data to test pretty much the same process with different scenarios and different combination of source data, contracts, business partners. And it was just unmanageable, all doing it manually. So a colleague of mine and I started looking at ways of automating this. I mean, mostly creating a contract because there were so many steps involved. And we started looking at LSMW, but in the standard GUI transaction CRM, the underscore order in CRM, the LSMW just couldn't script some of the changes we had to do. So we started looking further, and then we found GUI Scripting, which is a really simple way of automating something in the SAP GUI. And it is easy mostly because the scripting has a recording functionality. So you do whatever you want to do once, you record it. And just like you record a macro in Microsoft Excel, the GUI will generate you a Visual Basic script, which then you can run again. And we thought that, you know, Excel is based on Excel can do Visual Basic, so we just combine the two, and we will run the whole process from Microsoft Excel. So this is what this video about: how to embed or how to generate a script out of the SAP GUI and then put it into Microsoft Excel and then perform repetitive tasks, all based on Microsoft Excel data. I see the following pros and cons to GUI scripting as opposed to any other methods of, for example, LSMW, or even building your own program to do certain stuff. Definitely one pro is that it doesn't require any ABAP programming, so you don't need to have any ABAP skills, as long as you can perform the operation using the GUI in the standard transactions. Well, it can be standard or bespoke transactions. You can record them, and then you can simulate this, the same steps over GUI scripting. And because there is no ABAP or there is no any other configuration, it is relatively easy to deploy, because you just take your Excel file and you point to another client or another system, and you can perform the same operations, assuming that the system works the same way, it has the same screens and transactions and whatever you want to execute. Once you have an example, and probably once you have done a few of these scripts, I find that it's relatively easy to do to create a new script. So I think for me it would take about maybe an hour or two just to create something completely new from scratch, obviously reusing one of my earlier examples. And you can see from this video how easy it is actually, so it doesn't require a lot of effort. Because it is Excel, it is easy to use, and it can also be used by end users if the particular activity requires that to be executed by end users. And also changes are made relatively easy, because all you need to do is use the built-in Visual Basic editor of Microsoft Excel. So all the coding is done in Excel, in Visual Basic, as opposed to ABAP, where you would need to make your changes in the development system and transport it through the landscape. So there are two cons that I can think of. One is if GUI scripting is not enabled in your system or client, then obviously it's not going to run. And you might need to convince your project or your basis team to enable that if you can't do it. And the other thing is, because it's actually performing the same operations that you would do manually, it is relatively slow. So it can be just as fast as your screen can go from one screen to another, but still it does all the manual checks, loading the screen, which the system would do otherwise. So obviously it is going to be slower if you would have your own program to do the same operations, but I think that's normal. This video shows a script recorded in CRM, but because it's a SAP GUI scripting, it works with any SAP product as long as it's obviously in the GUI. The Excel file that I'm editing and showing in here is available for download, and you can find the link in the video description. As I mentioned many times over, GUI scripting is in Visual Basic. So it is not essential, but I think it's certainly useful if you know some programming, specifically if you know some Visual Basic, because we will be actually editing Visual Basic code. Using my example Excel file, it should be fairly easy to build a new script which performs a different operation. But again, if you get stuck and you don't know anything about Visual Basic or programming in general, probably it's going to be quite difficult to find the problem and make your script work. What we will cover in this video is this script that you can see on the screen. It does a really simple job. It opens up business partners, which are stored here in column A, and then it updates search term 2, which is in column B, and then it saves the business partner, and it also captures the information message which is appearing on the bottom of the screen in the status bar. Within this Excel file, I'm also defining the system that I want to connect to, so it will be DCG210, and just for the sake of simplicity and the easy usage, I added a status column to this Excel file, which I can set 0 for all the items in the Excel which I want to process, and then also the script updates the status, saying that if it managed to run the script successfully or the script failed for whatever reason, so I can easily see at the end which business partner has been updated and which one are not. Before we look at the Excel example, I just want to give a short overview about the scripting itself. GUI scripting is accessible for the customized local layout menu, and it is under script recording and playback. When you select that, you will have this dialog box appearing, which obviously you can see there is a script playback, there is a script recording, and then there is another screen input field when you press more, where you actually can specify the file that you want to run or the file name that you want to create. So this is what we are going to use to do scripting. On top of this, if you go into options and you find the option for scripting, in the GUI level you can also enable or disable scripting, so make sure that this is enabled, and untick these two checkboxes. Basically what this does is, for example, the top one, whenever a script tried to attach to your GUI session, it would just show a pop-up, and until you press OK, the script is not going to run. I mean, since you will be running your own script, I don't think that's necessary, so that's just annoying, so I usually just turn it off. So leave your options like this, and what you can see here on the bottom of the screen, you see this icon, and if you move the mouse over it, it says SAP GUI Scripting. Script is not running. That just means that scripting is enabled in this client, but it's not running at the moment. And scripting itself is controlled by a few system variables or system parameters. So if you go to RZ11 and you look for, star GUI star script star, and then you just F4, you can see that there are quite a few parameters for GUI scripting. Usually, in general, if you open the SAP GUI /user_scripting, and if you display the parameters, this should be all true. So that's the overall enabler for the GUI scripting, which is true in my system, so I can run scripting. Of course, if you have false, then either you can use this to change the value, or you need to ask Basis or someone else to do it for you if you don't have access. The other thing which sometimes is disabled is the SAP GUI /user_script disable recording. So again, if this would be false, if this will be true, then you can play scripting but you can't record. So probably you will find this, that even scripting is enabled in your system, probably the recording itself is disabled, let's say in your quality or in production system. But that should be fine because you do the recording in your development, and then the same script should run in your entire landscape. So that's not really a problem. But again, keep in mind, if you don't see if both of these buttons are disabled, probably the whole scripting is disabled. If only record is disabled, then it's the recording parameter which is probably set to true to disable the recording. So by changing the values, you can enable them as long as you have access to it. And also remember, you will also get a pop-up whenever you change the values. These values might default back to the default settings once the server is restarted. Before we start looking at the Excel script and the whole Excel file, let's just create a recording for what we are going to do. So we want to load a business partner, change the search term to, and save the changes. So for that, I'm going to use the transaction BP, the open function to open any business partner, and then obviously make the changes there and click on the save button. So to record this, I call the scripting. This open the scripting window. I set the file name, so something .vbs for Visual Basic Script, and yeah, I click on record. And this one stays on the screen now, and you can see that this icon starts to the animation is on for the scripting icon, which means that either the script is running, as in I'm recording a script, or I'm playing back a script. So this is fine now. So let's start by starting the transaction. And so I do /nbp. I use the open function. I open one of my previous business partners. I wait for it to load. I go to edit, and I change the search term to, and I save. And I wait a little bit more. And my business partner is saved, so that should be the end of the script. So I stop scripting. So if I go to, if I open up this Visual Basic Script that we just recorded, then I can see pretty much everything which the system has generated for me. So there is a little bit of code here which creates a couple of objects, and then it tries to open to a session, which is one of your SAP GUI windows, and then it just enables scripting. And basically this is where all the magic happens. And it looks quite difficult to read, but it's not that difficult if you really look into it. So usually the first step which each script generates is just push the GUI window to maximum size, so it maximizes it. And then you can see the next one is it is picking up this object, and then it's putting the text /nbp. So that's where I put in the transaction code into the transaction code field. And then the next one is probably when I pressed enter to start the transaction. And the next one I press the button, which is probably the open button. And here I enter the business partner number. And there is some other stuff happening here. And then there is a whole load of code, which is to access some component in the screen. I mean, you remember in BP transactions, there are a lot of different tabs. So if you're using a simpler transaction, it's going to be much less code. But here you can see that I'm entering the search term too. And there is a couple of button presses, and probably that's the enter key that I pressed after entering the search term. And I'm pressing a button on the toolbar, which is actually the save button. So that was the last operation before I hit the end button in the script recording. So that's all the code you need to change a business partner. And just one hint. So because I'm going to be running this piece of script over and over again, it's just useful that you start all your transaction with /n, so you don't have to come out in this transaction at the end, but you can just sort of like restart the transaction at any point. And so as you can see, the script records every single screen button press. So the only way your repetitive script is going to work if your screen sequence is the same throughout the entire process. So for example, if you are maintaining a business partner and you have address check, which sometimes throws up an address check window, sometimes it doesn't, your script is not really going to work, because sometimes it has to handle those extra screens, in other cases it wouldn't. And so whenever you create a recording, think about all these cases. Maybe there is an alternative transaction which is simpler to use, or you might need to create two different scripts for case 1 and case B. But again, we'll probably see later but that you might have some way to work around those problems. So now that we recorded our first script, it's time to go over to Excel and try to put it into this Excel template. So first of all, in Excel, I think it's probably not enabled by default, but there is a developer tab where you can find all the Visual Basic related buttons in Microsoft Excel. And I think if you right click on the ribbon and customize ribbon, you can enable the developer tab. But again, this screen might look different from depending on what Excel version you have. But most of the things that I'm going to be doing now can be accessible through shortcuts as well. So what you see in the Excel document is, there is just only one worksheet, and the only special component on it is a button. Everything is hidden behind scripts. So if you right click on this button and you click on assign macro, you can see what this button is doing. It's basically starting a piece of code or method which is called start processing. And to look into the code, we need to go into the Visual Basic Editor. But let's just go through the actual content of the script of this worksheet. So, the first few lines I only kept it for some comments. So if I had some more complicated scripts where data need to be prepared in a certain way, so I just used the first few, up to line 8 to put some text in here, but there is nothing here, so I just collapsed most of the rows. So the first cell or row with any content is cell A8, where I keep the system and the client which I want to use or which I want to connect to. So it will be DCG210, so it's always the seed and the client number in without any spaces. Under it, I just keep a counter. So when I start the script, it will go and find all the items that it needs to process, and then it will also keep this counter running. So if I have a huge list, at least I know where my script is. And I have obviously the button which starts the whole process, and I have a couple of data tabs, data columns, where I keep the data that I want to process. Then I have this status column, which is one if I want the line to be processed, and then once it starts processing, it sets the status to 2, and 1, and then if it's complete, it's status 2. And then if it fails, then it's status 3, and this column just basically does a lookup on the status code. And in status E, that's where I save the message from the status bar. So what my script is going to do is when I click on Start Script, it will try to determine how many actual lines I have, or data lines I have in my Excel sheet, starting from row 11, and then it basically just looks in column A until it finds an empty one, and that it considers it at the end of the file. And then within that range, it will look for all the items that are 0. So that would be the base of the counter here, and then it just starts processing every single row one by one, and run that script that we have just created through with these numbers which are here in the Excel. So let's see how that's done. So to go into the Visual Basic Editor, I need to click on I either click on Visual Basic, or you press Alt 11, which opens up the Microsoft Visual Basic for applications. So that's the code editor for Microsoft Excel or any other Microsoft products, or so it can be the Word and Office, Word and PowerPoint as well. So one important thing to note is your Excel needs references to the SAP GUI Scripting object, which is obviously delivered by SAP. So if you go into Tools Preferences, you should see that the SAP GUI Scripting is in the available references. So if it's not, because you are starting from a brand new Excel file, make sure that it's ticked. So you should find it either in the list, or if you can't find it in the list, you use the Browse button to find that OCX file. So you can see the reference here. It's under Program File SAP Frontend SAP GUI and SAP fewse.ocx. If you don't have this, the script is not going to work. And you can see that on my main sheet, which is sheet 8, or the sheet called script, there is also one. There is only one, 3 lines of code, which is that's the piece of code which is getting executed when I click on the button. So it starts start processing method, which is actually found in modules and module 1. So that's all the code which is required to make this whole process work. I mean, it seems a lot, but even if you try to reuse this example for your scripting, there is only a very little piece of it which you need to change, and the rest you can just keep it as it is. But in this video, I'm going to go through the whole code so you understand how it works, and you can tweak it if you want to, or if you need to for any reason. So the first thing I wanted to note is this constant up here in the code. This is something that I just added because in some cases I was using so many different GUI windows, and I wanted my script to attach to a particular window, because otherwise it just finds the first GUI session, which is the same system and the client, and if I was using that for some other purpose, then it would just go out of the transaction and then start using that, which sometimes I didn't want. So I put this constant in, which says BP, which means that the script later on is going to go through all my sessions, GUI sessions. It will check whether it is the correct system and client, and then it also checks whether that GUI session is running this particular transaction. So it will only attach to a session which is running transaction BP. So you have to go into BP transaction first and then start the script in order to make it work. To view the rest of the code, I think I'm going to go in the sequence how it is executed instead of going reviewing the code from top to bottom. So I can just find the start processing method. So this is what it's that's the one which is getting called when I click on the button. So there is a few object variable declarations up on the top. You don't really have to worry about it in most of the cases. I have another constant which just shows me what is my first row where I have the actual data. So row 11, which is basically this. So it's I want to make sure that I skip all the headers and I'm not taking all these columns into account. So that's row 11. And so what I'm doing first is I'm trying to attach to a session. So I'm saying that attach session 8, which is the 8 just says that the system ID is so the system ID and the client ID is in row 8, column A. So it's cell A8. So I'm just passing that through to a piece of script or a method which is called the attach session, and that's basically a reused piece of code from what SAP has generated. So what you see here is pretty much copied and pasted over here with some additional checks. So obviously you can see that the system is checking if I'm corrected already, and if I'm connected already, it's just double checking that whether I'm connected to the correct client and the system. And then it just cycles through all my SAP GUI sessions, and it checks whether the system name and the client equals to the one that I defined in the Excel file. And this piece of code here then also checks whether the transaction which is running in the GUI session is that BP transaction code which I defined on the top of this Visual Basic code. So again, if you don't like that option, just take this highlighted piece of code out, and it would just attach to the first GUI session with the matching system and client. And if nothing is found, it would just give you a message that either the transaction is you are not logged into the system, or you are not running the transaction, or the scripting is not enabled. So that piece of code just enables the session. Sorry, it just attaches to the SAP GUI session. It doesn't do anything else. So that was that piece of code. And again, if nothing is found, then again we are getting a message not connected to a client, and the code exits. And then what we are doing here is what I also mentioned above, is this loop just goes through all the items in column A until it finds something which is empty. And this is how I determine how many items I have that I need to process. So once I have the number, I just update the counter in in cell A9, which is this one. And then in the next, I'm cycling through all the items with the status 0, and I start processing them. So one thing which worth to note is, in many cases, just to read Excel or update any Excel cells, I'm using this piece of code, which is the object sheet, which is the variable for my actual worksheet. And I'm using cells, and then in the cells you define the row and the column to get a value of a column, or to write write the value of, sorry, not of a column, a cell, or to write a value of the cell. So if you need more than 2 columns here, and then you start shifting the status to, I don't know, maybe H or something, then obviously you need to update these values. So you see here that I'm using the I row is always the row that I'm processing, and then column 3 is, this is 1, 2, and column 3 is column C. That's where I'm getting the status from, or I'm updating the status to. Again, the counter would probably remain the same, but here in this piece of code, again, you see that I'm checking whether the status is 0. So again, if it's in a different column, that value, number 3, needs to be changed. So I'm looping through all the items in all the lines in the Excel file, again checking if the status is 0, and if the status is 0, then I'm calling this method, which is the process row, which is process every individual row, and that's the one which is going to run the actual SAP script. And the rest of the method is just freeing up memory and then destroying some of the objects. So now we come to the process row method, which is where all the stuff happens. So I'm setting at the beginning of the method, I'm setting the status to 3. So it's I'm setting the status to 1, which shows that it's being processed. And in here, I'm just getting a few loading some of the cell contents into local variables. So just like before, you can see that object sheet cells I row, 1 is going to read the value from the first column, which is the business partner number, and I'm saving it in a local variable which is called W_BP number. So the W_BP number equals object sheet cells, I row, brackets I row, 1 brackets, and also I'm doing the same for the search term. So obviously for that I'm using the the second column because it's in column B. So that's all the variable declaration and getting the variables done. So if you change the example, and if you need different variables, and if you need more variables, you just repeat these piece of code. So these 5 lines of code as much as you need. You create new variables here just by putting them here, separated by comma. Obviously, you can change the name whatever you feel like. I mean, there are a couple of reserved words in Microsoft, well, not Microsoft, but in Visual Basic. So obviously, like the word function, dim, or if else, that are used as in the Visual Basic language, obviously cannot be used as variables, but probably you can see them. So once you start typing, and the reserved words will show up as blue, and anything else would be just, you know, plain black. But if you start something like, you know, W underscore or V underscore or whatever, with some sort of prefix and underscore, I'm pretty sure that you will find a word which is not a reserved word in Visual Basic. So that would be all about declaration. And the next one is probably, well, it's quite an interesting, important line here in the coding, which says on error go to my error. And what it does, if the Visual Basic finds any error in the remaining of this method, which is pretty much the GUI script, then instead of you know, displaying an ugly error message window, the execution of the code is going to go to my error handling method, which is basically here. So what it would do is it would update the status to 3. So again, column 3 update to 3, which is error. So this is how I can see that the script did not execute for whatever reason. And then I execute the GUI script, and then at the end I'm doing 2 more important stuff. So object sheet cells iRow 5 is the 5th column, so that would be column E, that my message, and that equals to object bar.text. So that piece of code always gets the text from the SAP GUI status bar, or what is it? Yeah, status bar. So for example, changes have been saved. That piece of text will get written into the to the Excel file. So this is where what you can see here is changes have been saved. So this is the actual text which is coming from the business from SAP. And again, if that would be a different transaction which outputs a different message, that would be appear here. Okay, going back to the GUI script. Going back to the actual Excel. And I conveniently skipped the most, well, the most crucial part of the code, which is the actual GUI script. And probably you can see that that's pretty much the same code what I've recorded earlier, but not exactly the same. So when SAP generates the code, it so all the lines start with this session dot something. And the way I written the program, I didn't I gave my session a different name. So my session is actually called, you know, object session, OBE session. So when you are moving your code from your Visual Basic file to Excel, well, at least to my example, all I'm doing is for every single line, I'm changing this session into, object session. Otherwise the code is not going to work. Once you renamed all your session variables to this one, then all you need to do is again to look through your script and then change anything which is like a fixed variable. Obviously that was something that you entered when you created the script, to replace that with one of the variables that you have created within the Excel file. So okay, I want to pass the business partner number from Excel. So here where it says the business partner number, I'm just going to replace it with the name of the variable, and the same with the search term. So I find the search term and I'm going to replace it here. So and obviously, because this is not a value but this is a name of the variable, it doesn't need to be in double quotes. And once you have done that, and that's all you need to do, and this is what I've done before. So you can see that it's now the two pieces of code here are identical, what I had working before and the one that I just imported from the script that I created a few minutes ago. So this is why I said that if you are not making a huge amount of changes to this Excel, replacing my example business partner script with your script, which does whatever process, it's actually fairly easy, because you just need to paste in the code which was generated by the SAP GUI. You change these session variables in the beginning of each of your line, and then you start replacing your fixed values to your local variables that is reading data from your Excel file, and that should be all there is to it. So even if you scroll, well, that's the end of the Visual Basic document. So that's all the code you need to make it work. So in order to run it, I can just close this one. I'm going to set the status to 0 on all the items, so they are all pending. I'm just going to okay, come on. Okay, so I'm just going to put my Excel to the half of the screen so I can see what is happening in my SAP GUI session. So remember, the script accepts the transaction to have the GUI session to have the BP transaction on, which is on at the moment. So I just start scripting, and we should see the scripting executed. And it is actually executed. It just either my system or my connection is really, really slow now. And I mean, I can't move Excel anymore because this scripting is pretty much consumes the whole Excel application. So if you switch to another window and you switch back to Excel, probably the Excel file itself is not going to update properly. But if you keep it on your screen, or if you have two screens, you put it on your secondary screen, you should see the counter going up slowly as it processes each line. So I think we just finished with the first one, or maybe not. So we just wait a little bit longer, and you'll see how it runs. Okay, so now the search term 2 just got entered, and the saving was changed. No change were made, and then the message here appeared, no change were made, and the status is set to completed. And for some reason the first one failed, and we are going to find out why is it happening. So you see now I have executed, 1 out of 24 is executed completely. Now we are moving on to the third one, and this one has errored as well. And unfortunately, you need to wait until it completes. I mean, I haven't put anything in the code where you can stop the scripting in midway. If you really want to be nasty, probably the easiest thing is to go into your SAP session and say that I'm going to just close the session, and your Excel is just going to say that, oh, okay, I don't have the window anymore, and it's just going to display you some error messages. But yeah, that's one way to get out of it. Otherwise, you need to kill Excel from your task manager, which is also not too nice. The scripting has completed now, and what I can see that every second or so step in the script failed. So I get this message saying scripting is completed, so I click OK, I get the control over Excel back. So again, you see it's completed, and this one errored, completed, errored. And if you are lucky enough, and if your script doesn't go really quick, which is the case with business partner, the transaction BP, you probably can see what's going wrong, but in some cases you can't. So then you need to debug it, which is not awfully difficult with Visual Basic. So again, you need to go back to Visual Basic Editor, and because this is where all it happens, I'm just going to put a breakpoint in here. So I click here in the beginning of the line, and you see this red dot and the highlight which says it's the breakpoint being saved in that line in the code. So you go back to your Excel file, and then okay, so first of all you need to set the statuses back, otherwise nothing gets executed. So that is all good. Maybe I just delete this as well, so it's more clear to see what the script is doing or not. So I click on scripting, and almost immediately you will see the GUI window popping up because we already reached the breakpoint. And in order to navigate within the debug, if you just right click on the empty space in the menu bar, you can enable the debugging. So the debugging is this small toolbar, and what you really need is one single button, which is this, the step over. So if you keep clicking on that, the Excel is going to execute, your code line by line. So we just executed the first one, which is maximized because the window was already maximized. You don't see a change. So the next one, I'm entering the transaction BP. You can see it here. Next one, I'm clicking enter. So this, the GUI just reloads the transaction, and so you see that that's the transaction view. And the next one, I click on open. So the dialog opens. Actually, I can move this on the side as well. It's not going to make any difference. So the next one, I'm entering the number, and I click on OK, and that's all fine. And then I press on edit, and then it comes to edit mode, and I override the search term 2. So then I click enter, and then I press the save button. And actually at this point I can see that the first line has executed correctly, so I don't want to step anymore, so I can just click on execute or continue. So the execution will continue from that point onwards, and it will stop whenever it reaches the next breakpoint up here. So I just click on continue. So the change is made, and I'm immediately back in the script here in my breakpoint, but now with the second line. So let's keep stepping into the code. So maximize, no change, entering the business partner, clicking OK, bringing up the open window, putting the new number in, execute, and you can probably immediately see what the problem is now. So BP transaction remembers whether you were in edit or display mode within the BP transaction. So what happens now is this piece of code is now going to put the business partner back to display mode. And then obviously now it will fail to override the search term 2 because the field is no longer visible. No longer editable. So if I click on the next button, oops, you see that my execution has gone to my error. So this is where my code has errored out, and I have gone to row 3, which then puts the error status on this line, and then it will just continue with the next line. And this is why the one line failed, the other one executed, because I'm just switching between edit and display mode all the time. So every second one fails because it tries to update the business partner in display mode. So I can keep on continue, or what I can do is I can click on reset as well, which just stops the execution altogether. So there are a couple of ways to go around this. So first of all, maybe you can just delete this line which does the insert button, or if you put the apostrophe in the beginning of the line, that just puts the whole line in comment. So you can see it turns green, so that's basically it acts as a comment. That line is not going to get executed. I mean, there's probably no better way to go around this, because from the script, it is really hard to tell whether the transaction is in edit mode or in display mode. So you would need to remember that you need to go into the BP transaction. Probably you need to open up a business partner for the first time, and you need to go into edit mode, because then the transaction will remember that it always has to go to edit mode, and you just skip the step where you press the edit button. Probably as simple as that. So if I go to edit here now, and I set the status back to 0, I delete this one, and I start the script over, then if I was right, the script should be able to update every single business partner in the Excel file. And as you can see, it is happening right now. Yeah, you see, completed, and the next one is processing. So it should be all fine. But again, this was something which is only happening in the BP transaction. Probably in other transaction that doesn't behave the same. So recording a script, putting into the Excel file should give you an error-free example. So as you can see, the Excel is now slowly working through its way the script, processing each line one after the other. As I said in the beginning, it's not particularly fast. I mean, probably the transaction BP is not the fastest either, but you have an idea how what kind of performance you get out of this. And now you can see that the script is completed, and we have all the items processed. And for some, we have the message that changes have been saved. For the others, there is no changes were made, because I was running the script over and over. So I haven't actually changed anything on the business partner, because they already had this search term too. But that's all there is to it. So what you need to remember is that, again, it differs on every single version of well, not every single version of Excel, but every Excel works slightly differently. But in the newer versions, if you want to have Excel which does macros, make sure that you save in this format. So Excel macro enabled workbook. So it's XLSM, because otherwise you don't get the macro functionality. And I think in other cases of Excel, so in earlier versions, whenever you open the Excel file, then you will get a notification up here whether you want to enable the macros. So you had to click on enable macros. But there are various settings in Excel how you can trust certain sources. But in general, save it as macro enabled one, and if you get a prompt, just enable the macros. And of course, the sample Excel file is available for download, and the link is in the video description. So this would be the end of lesson 1 of GUI scripting. But for now, thanks for watching.